Hey sophomores, so you are currently watching the Wide Sargasso Sea Part 2 lecture video of pages 59 through 86. It's a pretty lengthier part, and so we're going to probably be breaking this up into maybe 2 to 3, maybe 4 lecture videos actually, but it's fine because you're not reading as much, okay? So I'm going to move over this way. And I'm going to get started, and so that I can keep this under 15-20 minutes, give or take. Okay, so part 2, and I know I talked about it in the background lecture, but remember that part 2 has a shift in narration. It's still first person point of view, however this time it's now Rochester's point of view. And so things I definitely want you to be mindful of, I mean throughout the entirety of part 2, is really how Rochester's thoughts, ideas, attitudes, feelings towards others, landscape, etc. Compare and contrast to the way that Antoinette narrates. Now, yes, I am aware that Antoinette is essentially a child when she narrates part 1, but still, even so, she does have a female perspective, a female lens, I guess you can say, versus Rochester has a male perspective. And so thinking about, the way that he describes things, the adjectives he uses in comparison to the way that Antoinette describes things, the adjectives she uses, thinking about, his general attitude, his feelings, even like the level of complexity behind his sentence structure versus her sentence structure in terms of how they are similar or really how they're different. And so I want you to really look at the first few pages and think about how Rochester's character is established. I mean, if you think about Rochester from what we remember in Jane Eyre, so I want you to think back to last quarter in terms of how would you have described Rochester, right? He was our Byronic hero. He was mysterious, brooding, seemed like super, mature and knew a lot about the world and just very kind of withdrawn almost. And I'm just thinking about how he is maybe either the same or different from when you read Sargasso Sea and his perspective there. Because we never actually get Rochester's perspective in Jane Eyre, and now we really do. And so tell me about his character traits. If you even read about the first, particular paragraphs and how he describes his servant, Emily, how he describes the village itself, the word choice, the diction that you notice, and how it's a little bit different than in Antoinette's kind of narration. And so in general, of course, I do want you in the first few pages making note of his attitude towards Antoinette. I mean, think about how he describes her. I watched her critically. She wore a tricorn hat that became her, page 60-61. At least it shadowed her eyes, which are too large and can be disconcerting. She never blinks at all, it seems to me. Long, sad, dark, alien eyes. So I want you to think about okay, remember that they are recently married. They're essentially on their honeymoon, and consider how he describes Antoinette and what that means by his attitude. If you were recently married and you're describing your wife in the first, month of marriage, would you necessarily say that she has disconcerting eyes that are too large and they're like alien eyes? What do you feel? What's the connotation behind his word choice in describing her? And also in general, the place and its people. So just consider that in the first few pages. And also, and this is in general as well throughout the entirety of the whole part, I guess, but especially in the first few pages, why don't you make note of the words, phrases, the events that have occurred that suggest the marriage has not started well. Consider where they're honeymooning. Consider what has happened in the first month of their marriage, what happens to Rochester specifically. And also consider maybe when they are together and something that Antoinette asks him to do and he's like, nah, I'm not going to. Just those are all kind of small events that are very small, but I hope you guys are kind of red flags for the marriage, right? So the next couple of pages, 63 to 69 essentially, things again I want you to note is how he reacts to the tropical landscape. So on page 63, where the paragraph starts, the road climbed upward, I want you to note and to, establish that pages 59 to 63 are essentially where they are honeymooning. That's the first pages of their honeymoon. Now they are traveling from their honeymoon location to, where they're going to reside, which is Grand Bois. I want to say it's Grand Bois. It could be Grand Bois, but I'm going to say Grand Bois because it sounds more French. I don't know. And so look at the first essentially 4 paragraphs and consider how he reacts to the tropical landscape. I understood why Okay, there you go. I think I have the delivery, and so Penny is going crazy. Okay, that's cool. I'm gonna wait a couple of seconds to calm them down. Maybe I'll cut this out. I probably won't. I've been getting lazy with my editing, if you haven't noticed. Pretty lazy, sorry. Here, in case you wanted to see what's going on with these dogs. Can I do this? Is it? Okay, that's not happening. So there's that. There's Cooper and Penny. You can see all my screens up. Do you see that? Okay. Oh my gosh, look at that messy corner. Don't look at it. It's all hidden. Everything looks clean and organized, but it actually isn't. Okay, sorry. Don't. Okay, anyways, so a couple of lines I'm going to read to you, and I just want you to think and consider kind of the implications of what those lines mean. I understood why the porter had called it a wild place. Not only wild, but menacing. Those hills would close in on you. Everything is too much, I felt as I rode wearily after her. Too much blue, too much purple, too much green, the flowers too red, the mountains too high, the hills too near, and the woman is a stranger. Her pleading expression annoys me. I have not bought her. She has bought me, or so she thinks. So consider his reaction to the landscape, and also consider specifically his reactions to Christophine. Pages 64, no, actually pages 66, 67. His initial interactions. Sorry, I hope you can hear me. His initial interactions with Christophine and how, I guess you would say, he is responding and reacting to her. And then, oh my goodness. Hang on. Penny, come here. Come here, Penny. Hey, you, hush. Hey, leave Cooper alone. Okay, sorry y'all. So then in 68 through 69, he reads a letter that he has written to his father. And so as you're reading the letter, I want you to really think about what he says to his father, how he describes what's happening in comparison to how he's described and narrated everything thus far from 59 through essentially 68. And so what do you notice about what he says in the letter to his father versus what he doesn't say? How does he seem to present and portray everything happening in a letter? And I guess if you want to kind of think of it as a more modern analogy, thinking about like reality versus appearance, right? Like social media. How do we typically present ourselves to the public, and why do we do that? Why do we maybe gloss things over versus the reality and actuality of it? And so if you think about what he says and or what he doesn't say, what then does that reveal about his relationship with his father? Like, does it reveal anything? Does it tell you anything about how he feels, what he wants, his desires, his motivation? This letter is pretty short, but it tells you a lot about, I guess, his thoughts and his emotions and his relationship with his father, and in terms of why he presents things. And so again, think about what he says, or more importantly, what he doesn't say, and just consider what he's narrated thus far about the landscape, about Antoinette, about everyone around him. Okay, so and then of course the next couple of pages, hang on, I'm switching my PowerPoint slides. He then flashbacks to the wedding itself. And I think I want you to consider the timing of that and the purposeful placement of that. Why would the author Jean Rhys have, Rochester narrate this event after the honeymoon? And consider what happened in part 1 when, I guess, Antoinette narrates her mother's death, like a year later, and kind of what the implication of that means. If you think about that, like if I were like, hey, like how was your weekend? How did it go? And you were like, oh, Friday I had dinner, Saturday I had breakfast, I worked out, I read, Sunday I went to church with my family, and then I went grocery shopping, and then I got ready for bed. Oh yeah, and then I got married, on Saturday. Like, what I guess is the importance, or maybe something else, but what is the significance of Rochester mentioning the wedding afterwards? And so I also want you to remember in Jane Eyre, Rochester mentions very explicitly to Jane, he's like, oh, I was tricked into this marriage. I was forced into this marriage. I had no idea. I was in love with Antoinette, or I thought I was in love. I was blindly in love. She blinded me, you know, and I want you to think about how that is proven wrong in these pages. When he narrates the wedding, what does he say about it? What does he say his role in the wedding was? And also even what happened before the wedding. And so how do these pages completely prove wrong his claims in Jane Eyre when he says, I was tricked? I want you to consider who was being tricked, who was being forced, and how do you know that from these pages, from this narration? And that's pages 69, 70, 71, and 72, because there's a lot of components there. And so essentially, when you think about all of the initial pages, Rochester's attitude towards the landscape, towards the people, towards his wife, the letter he wrote to his father, how he was during the wedding, why do you think Rochester marries Antoinette? What is his real motivation? And it's kind of a thematic idea in terms of why Rochester marries Antoinette, but essentially, why does Antoinette marry him? Why does she accept? Because on page 71, 72, she actually tries to get out of the marriage, essentially. And so why does she marry him? And consider, I guess, some thematic ideas that may help you is maybe gender roles, patriarchal oppression, manipulation, maybe, I would say, and just in terms of why she ends up saying yes to him and ends up kind of acquiescing and choosing to marry him. And so these pages definitely kind of go over that. Then we have the next couple of pages, and this is really throughout the entirety of this part, but I would say there's also very clear, explicit phrases and incidents that really showcase trouble to come in the relationship. And that's on page 73 with the moths and the beetles. Tell me about essentially what happens and how that maybe kind of showcases trouble in the relationship. Also, the page on 73, their conversation about the countries. Is it true that England is like a dream? Because one of my friends who married an Englishman wrote and told me so. She said this place, London, is like a cold, dark dream sometimes. I want to wake up. Well, I answered annoyed, that is precisely how your beautiful island seems to me, quite unreal and like a dream. Why would that be a red flag for their relationship? The fact that they both view each other's countries in that way. And then, of course, Antoinette shares with him a third dream. Well, she doesn't share with him the other two dreams, but she shares with him a dream. And it's her third dream. And so what's featured, and hopefully the little PowerPoint gives you a big hint of what's featured in the dream in terms of what is the point of the dream, and compare it and contrast it with the other two dreams in part one. And if you maybe notice, again, a pattern. Also on page 76, essentially, there's a song that he sings to her. Consider again the implication and the parallelism in that dream or in that song. Hail to the queen in the silent night, shine bright, robin, as you die. Shine bright, robin, as you die. Like, that's a very interesting song choice to sing to your wife, right? So again, consider the symbolism, the representation there, all of that, okay? And finally, not finally, I have two more slides after this, but I want you to consider the contradictions in 76 through 80, or just in general of Rochester's response to the place and his people. Make two lists. Go back and think about what he likes and what he enjoys, and also what he dislikes and what he's fearful of. And so just to give you a hint, it's pretty selfish, I would say. He seems to enjoy, like, you know, drinking the coffee, eating the food, and also swimming in the island pools, and of course what he describes in a negative way. And so consider kind of those two lists there, and also in general the next couple of pages thinking about images that are transient, so things that aren't lasting, so just making note of them. I mean, I would say a lot of this part is very symbolic. I mean, the whole novel is symbolic, but just, you know, being mindful of images that I guess are transient, moments that just seem like very momentary. And then in the last few pages, just make note of, I guess, components and references of things that are hidden and of secrets. Particularly on page 80, when Antoinette makes a mention of, he was like, oh, who taught you how to throw? She's like, oh, just Sandy, you know, this boy that you've never met before. Sounds really sketchy if you were to take it out of context. And so consider, one, why would Antoinette not want to share Sandy's origins and her relationship with Sandy to Rochester? Consider, I guess, her view on Sandy, why she's hesitant to say that he's her cousin. Like, and so consider what lens that would be a part of, and it's a racial lens, FYI, just to give you a hint. And also why she wouldn't want to tell her husband about that. But then consider, like, I don't know how Rochester might view it if he didn't know. It's like, who's Sandy? Like the sketchiness behind it. And on page 81, there's a kind of conversation where Antoinette mentions that she loves Grambois, and Grambois, of course, is her island, her estate where she resides. Why does she love it more than a person? Why would she love this estate more than a person? Like, consider her past, all of part 1, and the reason and rationale behind that. And finally, the last slide, sorry, now it's the last slide, the last 6 pages, I would just in general be mindful of all the phrases in the section that reveal or refer to hurt, threat, violence, endings, death, isolation. There's a lot, especially Antoinette's kind of talking points, her dialogue, her conversation, what she thinks, and then also how he thinks about her. There's a lot of really, really dark components where he says, you know, die, then sleep. This is page 86. It is all I can give you. I wonder if she ever guessed how near she came to dying. In her way, not in mine. It is not a safe game to play in that place. Desire, hatred, life, death. Death came very close in the darkness. And so I just want you to be mindful of those components and how they might relate to Antoinette and Rochester's relationship, particularly how the relationship ends and the way it develops in these passages. One thing I also want to note, one quote, page 85, I did not love her. I was thirsty for her, but that is not love. I felt very little tenderness for her. She was a stranger to me, a stranger who did not think or feel as I did. And again, remember that this is supposed to be a married couple, a husband and a wife. And when he says things like that, you know, he did not love her, but rather was thirsty for her. What was, I guess, the relationship really driven by then? What is the relationship? What brings and moves the relationship along? If it's not emotion and if it's not love, then what is it? And so it is tied to what he says in Jane Eyre when he says that he was blinded by lust. And so just kind of think about the physical component of the relationship, and essentially that seems to be all they really have. And so those are essentially it. And so that's basically it thus far. There's a lot of symbolism, a lot of foreshadowing, a lot of red flags essentially that lead you to realize and understand that their marriage did not start well, is not happening, and is not occurring very well, and is not ending very well either. Okay, so hopefully that helps a little bit with the beginning of part 2. Pages 87 to 115 are next, and I'll have another live lecture next week. Hopefully you can come by if you think that these videos aren't sufficient and you kind of want a more like hands-on approach. Okay, so hope you're doing well. Have a great Easter weekend, and I will hopefully see you. I'll send out a little daily check-in tonight. And so there's that, okay? Alrighty, goodbye.